We're going to start this lesson off with helpful tips. Then we'll move on when to use the right lane closure, how to select the proper right lane closure, setting up the right lane closure, working the right lane closure, and then we'll finish up with the proper order in which to break down the right lane closure. There are 5,280 feet in a mile, which means that a tenth of a mile is 528 feet. Knowing that a tenth of a mile is 528 feet will help you when using your odometer in your truck to determine the proper spacing for the different parts of your work site. Knowing this is especially helpful when your early warning signs need to be 500 feet apart. Another helpful tip is if the road you're working on has reflective bumps between the white lines separating the two lanes of travel heading in the same direction, they should be the same spacing footage-wise as the posted speed limit. This tip is particularly helpful when placing cones in the road. So when can you do a lane closure? Well, if you have at least two lanes of traffic heading in the same direction and you have an arrow board, you have the makings of a lane closure. But if you don't have both of these, you can't take a lane unless you're able to take the lane out before it actually becomes a lane. Another thing to note is, just because you took an arrow board out to the job site doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be doing a lane closure. There are 4 things that you want to ask yourself before you start putting equipment in the street. Where is the work site? Whether it's on or off the road, you need to know how much room is needed for a safe work area. How many and what type of vehicles will be on the work site? Make sure you're in communication with the work crew foreman to go over any potential hazards and type of work because it may affect what type of setup you need. Look at the road layout. How many lanes of travel are there? How is the opposing traffic separated? No paint, painted solid line, raised center median, turning median. All of these things play a factor when you choose the traffic plan that you base your setup on. Look for other paths of travel, like sidewalks, bike lanes, turn pockets, and side streets. These things will also play a factor in which traffic plan you select. If you have any of these things, you'll usually have to use multiple traffic plans and put them together to create your work site. And lastly, you want to know what the speed of the road is. You have to know the speed of the road so that once you have selected the traffic plan or plans, you'll know where to properly place everything. Now that you've found your work site, figured out how large your work area will need to be and what type of traffic is going to be affected, refer to your traffic control manual for proper plans. These standards are approved for specific utilities. SDG&E territory uses the San Diego standards and Edison territory uses the Joint Utility Manual. Both of these are based off of the California Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or the CAMUTCD. Each manual has subtle differences, so it's important that you find and refer to the correct plans before you begin. These standards will be located in a binder in your truck. Make sure that it is there before you leave the yard because it also contains other important information that you should familiarize yourself with. So here's a couple of examples of basic right lane closure traffic plans. So let's take a closer look at one of the plans that I just showed you. This plan is for a single right lane closure with a solid double yellow line separating the opposing traffic. You may need to use different or other traffic plans in conjunction with this one if you have side streets, driveways, sidewalks, or bike lanes. Now it's time to get your numbers. Use your spacing chart to determine the following: road speed, taper length, buffer length, sign spacing, and cone spacing. For this exercise, the speed of the road will be 55 miles an hour. This is an example of a spacing chart. On it, you'll find sign spacing, taper length, buffer length, and cone spacing for different parts of the setup. According to the spacing chart, the taper will be a minimum of 660 feet long. The buffer will be a minimum of 335 feet. And the sign spacing will be 500 to 1,500 feet apart. We know that our buffer is going to be a minimum of 335 feet, and the taper is going to be 660 feet minimum for a 55-mile-an-hour road. That's 995 feet minimum from the start of the taper to the very first vehicle in the work site for a proper taper and buffer for the speed of the road. Once you have determined the length of your worksite and you've figured out how long your taper and buffer need to be, you can set out your early warning signs at the proper distances. Be sure to always set out your end roadwork signs, and on this traffic plan, it calls for a roadwork ahead sign for the opposing traffic. Once all your early warning signs are set out and you're ready to begin setting out cones for your taper, be sure that you know what the proper cone spacing is going to be for the different parts of your setup. Always start at the shoulder of the road to begin your taper and work your way back towards the worksite. Make sure that your arrow board is displaying the correct pattern, and the lane closure sign should be at the end of the taper, signifying the start of the buffer. If you follow the standards properly, you should not have to make many changes, but you still want to keep an eye on traffic to make sure that it is flowing properly. Make sure to keep yourself away from any potential hazards, especially within the worksite. And if you have a partner, one of you should be on each end of the worksite. Each traffic control person should have a two-way radio with them so that they can communicate any changes or hazards. A stop-slow paddle will come in handy if you need to hold traffic, because your hand is never an acceptable device for holding traffic. Setups can be very long and you may not be able to see what's going on with all of your equipment. To make sure that everything stays in place, periodically drive your worksite. This should only be done by one traffic control person so that you never leave the worksite unattended. Once you've been cleared by the crew to pick up and they are out of the closure, start by picking up your cones in the reverse order from the way you set them down. You never want to expose yourself or your partner to traffic by picking up the cones that are protecting equipment. So as you come up to any signs that were in the closure, pick them up first, then the cones that were in front of them. Once all of your cones are picked up, you may proceed by picking up all your early warning signs. It should look something like this. Thank you for taking your time learning